Hi everyone, we are Maddie and Laura, and we design experiential learning escape rooms. We've gotten a lot of questions for this type of content. So today we're going to highlight three different experiential learning puzzle types and where we get our inspiration from. We'll keep it short. We're even going to start timers for ourselves to keep us rolling and get through this nice and quick, but not in a shallow way by any means. So we're going to start with a puzzle type that we love. We love all of our puzzle types, but this just happens to be one that we thought of first, which is reverse engineering. So in short, reverse engineering puzzles rely on deconstructing. So rather than like you beginning to see the whole system, you know the outcomes, and learners have to infer what came before. So this can help with everything from things like systems thinking to adaptive reasoning, to hypothesis formation and testing. When we were thinking about examples or use cases for what this might look like in like genuine real world applications, for one of the first things that came to mind was I do a lot of home renovations. So I'm trying to save money, doing a lot of things myself. I'm working with my father-in-law to actually redo a couple of our electrical wires, so some of the circuits in our house. And fortunately, he's very good at reverse engineering because rather than, just cutting a line and hoping for the best that, that all of our lights will still work, he actually had to reverse engineer the entire circuit system in our house so that he could carefully deconstruct certain wires and make sure that once he reconnected things and or replaced certain wires or added new ones, that everything still functioned in our house. So that's a really practical application. But again, reverse engineering is a classic puzzle type, really helpful for experiential learning. I'm going to tag Laura in for our next one.
Another puzzle type really great for experiential learning is the logic puzzle. So, logic puzzles help you externalize thinking. Learners must form hypotheses and test constraints and revise their mental models based on whatever feedback or criteria is relevant. So, this could help you advance things like decision making, abstract conceptualization, constraint management, structural and conditional reasoning, that sort of thing. Um, as far as the real world use case, occasionally for holidays or large family gatherings, my family will plan a complicated menu, or more complicated than we do typically day to day, um, and work out how to balance diets and needs and the sort of the what we want to eat for this specific occasion. And then the logic puzzle piece is figuring out what order each element of the meal needs to be prepared. So, constraints like having a single oven, things like what needs to arrive at the table hot or cold, adapting to uncertainty when an attendee turns out to be late, a family member's running late or encounters bad weather, that sort of thing. Resource management logic. And so this can translate to other scenarios real directly if you're thinking restaurant management or resource management in any capacity, but also think things like information assessment, what's relevant and reliable, that sort of thing. Lots of options for a logic puzzle.
All right, next up is consequence simulation. So this one we leverage quite a bit. It's a very functional, very practical one. So if you're looking for one to get started with, this would be a good one to test and trial. It's relatively easy to set up. There you go. Might sense a little bit of hesitation there. It can get complicated very quickly, but on a very basic level, relatively easy to set up. But consequence simulations really help learners think about cause and effect. So if you're looking at, for instance, thinking about a decision, thinking about an action, ultimately you're pairing that with results, outcomes, um, responses on the back end. So you're really helping to prep and get your learners thinking about like future results. And thinking about those conditions of it's not necessarily right or wrong answers, but maybe better or worse along the way. And so, like a really classic example, I'll get to this and then I'll go back to some competencies, is like how we speak to one another. So, like, if I were to say, this is not true, but if I were to be like, Laura, your hair looks really bad right now, Laura might get upset, right? And so I am thinking about before I make that decision, I'm like, what might happen, right? If I offend Laura, whether intentionally or not, right? So this has a lot of highly practical real world use cases. And that's not just conversational, but this could be like negotiation. This could be like thinking through like a step-by-step process and like if I do X, what will happen? Or if I do Y, what will happen? And so lots of, as we said, use cases. some specific competencies to be thinking about. Again, tying that really to like explicit skill advancement, which is important for thinking if you're designing anything with experiential learning in mind. Everything from systems thinking, decision making, managing uncertainty, or even anticipatory thinking. So that's again that future planning. You're thinking ahead of time about what will happen if I choose X, Y, or Z choices along the way.
So we've talked about three different experiential learning puzzle types, but the options are really endless. So where do we get puzzle inspiration? There are puzzle books, and those can be useful, but they often highlight non-experiential puzzles or puzzles that would be difficult to make experiential. Things like crosswords or Sudokus. Don't get me wrong, I love a Sudoku, but where do we look for inspiration for more experiential puzzles? And honestly, most of it comes from our experiences, from games we've played, be it Dungeons and Dragons or video games or board games, to things like books and TV shows. So, mystery novels, improv, game shows, to things we've made. So, watercolor painting, things we've written in grad school that were unusual in their structure, or even house renovations, as Maddie mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and then so one of the as we were thinking about examples to share with you, really concrete ones, one of our favorite ones that we like to tell is as of late at least, is we were designing an experiential escape room consistent of multiple puzzles, but for one of the puzzles specifically, this one was in the world of business English. So within a workplace setting, we were charged with designing puzzles to help learners advance their use of English, written and verbal, included, but and just general comprehension of business English. And for this one specific puzzle, what we were describing, we realized we're like, you know what, this sounds like the game Battleship. In fact, it was Laura that first mentioned Battleship as a game, and I was like, yeah, you're right. And so Battleship became sort of the anchor. That then turned into Minesweeper, which if you were to play either of these games, and we recognize you might not be familiar with either of them. So if you're not, we encourage you to look them up. But they really deal with partial information. And also, as you get more information, you know if you're closer or farther away from your target. And we liked that idea for helping folks, improve their mastery or their competency of business English and giving them really specific feedback of, for instance, let's compare this directly to a consequence simulation. If I, in a consequence simulation, design it of like, hey, I can either offend Laura or not, right? Like I setting up two binary choices, but there's, as we know, language is far more nuanced than that. Like I could very subtly, I could less so subtly, or I could map offending Laura onto a Likert scale, right? Of multiple iterations of what that would look like. Um, and so because language is so nuanced, we like that idea of saying like, okay, hey, it was a little bit more or less professional or a little bit more or less successful, right, within different contexts that we were designing. And so we genuinely took that idea. Now, to be fair, ultimately what we designed wasn't Battleship or it wasn't Minesweeper. It had a life of its own, but it was inspired by both of those concepts as we really thought about, how can we take this idea that we really love and it gets lots of really nuanced feedback and apply it to our specific escape room puzzle with the tools that we had access to. And those are all ultimately, certain conditions you're going to be ending up dealing with in your own design work.
So even if you end up far away from your piece of inspiration, and we often do, it's really useful as a metaphor or a point of mutual understanding. Often, because you're designing experiential learning, you're designing something that doesn't already exist in a form. You're not just translating Battleship into a computer form and then throwing some content on top. And so, whether you're drawing a specific mechanic or using it to explain where your brain is going, it can be really useful metaphors. More concretely, how do we suggest you translate a source of inspiration like a game or a book into an experiential puzzle type? So we suggest you start by pulling apart your source of information. It can be useful to imagine you were the one designing it and try to figure out what were the design choices that went into this. So underneath the set design or underneath the book genre or the game art, what's the core mechanic? And what are people interacting with it doing? in the game, or if they're characters in a book, what are they actually doing? So are they searching for information and assessing its relevance? Are they moving objects from one location to another in a specific order or with specific constraints? And importantly, as the designer, which part of this game interests you? Is there just a single aspect that you're drawn to and want to pull out that's relevant?
Yeah, and as Lara touched on, the what are your players, or in this case your learners, actually doing? That's really fundamental, especially as you're thinking, and as this video is really highlighting, it's experiential puzzle types, not just puzzles. Designing puzzles is easy, but designing puzzles that are truly experiential, where learners are learning or advancing specific competencies by solving, that's what's challenging about designing experiential learning puzzles, and especially those within embedded within an escape room context. So that what are they doing, and mapping that to what is your specific learning goal or your learning objectives in general, right? You could have multiple goals. And really thinking about that, tying a specific puzzle mechanic, as Lara said, to your learning objectives by thinking about, what is it that I want them to be doing, and therefore, what is it that I want them to be learning along the way?
So, this is a big, broad topic. And of course, it's complicated in practice, which is why we tried to give you some real world applications and examples. We share free resources and idea regularly. So, stay tuned for more. And if you want to talk through how an escape room could work for your specific situation, whether you want to build it yourself or have us handle it, email me. We'll schedule a free escape room strategy session and dig into the specifics of what you're trying to do. Take care.
See y'all.